One of our favorite whiskey brands could be up for sale. Nike is releasing a sneaker that has many people wondering who approved that, and Netflix is slowly trying to become the next YouTube. Welcome to the Kickback Briefing. Welcome to this new podcast style called the Kickback Briefing, where we talk about the latest wins, challenges, and stories shaping business and culture, and dive deep into some of the biggest lessons we can learn from them. Now, full transparency, y'all, I love doing interview styles, and interviews aren't going anywhere. But as a small podcaster, it can be a little challenging getting a large number of guests to sign on to do interviews and be able to release them every week. So with these Kickback Briefings, I thought I'd try something new. We're going to talk about some headlines, some stories in business and culture, and then pull back and really look at the lessons, because a lot of times these headlines are like, ooh, that's a shock value. But what lessons can we learn as you're building a business, as you're growing a brand, as you're showing up in corporate, and even in your personal life? So I like to yap about business, so that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna kick back and yap about some business. So let's get into some of these stories this week. Our first story is an update on the Uncle Nearest lawsuit. Now, Uncle Nearest is a brand that was started by Fawn and Keith Weaver about 10 years ago. They discovered the story about Nearest Green. He is the black man that taught Jack Daniel how to distill, and nobody knew this for a very long time. Once they saw a news article about it, in her book, Love and Whiskey, Fawn takes us on this journey of how she discovered the story, went back to Tennessee. She did a deep dive into the Nearest Green family history, connected with the descendants, and created the Nearest Green Distillery and the Uncle Nearest brand. One of the biggest lessons I will tell you guys from watching this brand be built over like the last 10 years, seeing the reaction people have to the Uncle Nearest brand, is the importance of storytelling. We all know that our stories are erased far too often. How many times are we like, oh, I didn't know this about this person, or I didn't know this happened, or there's a lot of erasure around our contributions, right? And so one of the things Uncle Nearest brand and Fawn Weaver have done a really good job of is telling the story of Nearest Green and hooking an audience into that story. People aren't just customers. I will tell y'all, people are not just customers, they are fans. And when you can build a business and have fandom, those fans essentially become your brand ambassadors. The distillery tours are always sold out. I went to a distillery tour last year. Our tour was full. Like a bus came into our tour of at least 20, 30 people on top of like the 10 people that were already on the tour. That tour was full. Their tours sell out all the time. Anytime Fawn Weaver shows up at location to sign bottles, it's going to be a line around the corner, down the block. So if you are building a brand, one of the biggest things you can do is lean into your story, and you will hook your audience, and they will champion for you. They will champion your brand and be your brand ambassadors. So knowing what we know about Uncle Nearest, last year Farm Credit Mid-America filed a lawsuit alleging that Uncle Nearest defaulted on a $108 million loan. They breached their loan terms, and they were requesting a receiver. In response to this, Keith and Fawn Weaver filed a lawsuit against their CFO, alleging misconduct that resulted in the Farm Credit lawsuit and the reputational harm. So Farm Credit is saying, hey, you all breached your $108 million loan agreement and you breached the terms. And the Weavers are saying that's because of our CFO. So that's where they were. As of today, the company is still under a receiver as of September 2025. And unfortunately, the receiver has stated, according to the Lexington Herald Leader, that a sale in the next 6 months is the only viable option to maximize the value of the company and its assets. Now, I'm not going to do a deep dive into like how they spent the money and all that type of stuff. I'm leaving some links to some articles that do a dive into how some of the money may have been spent based on like reports that were filed with the court. But one of the lessons I want us to learn from this is to know your financials. I know the goal is to have a CFO, have people in leadership that they can be responsible for those things. And you should. You don't want to be the one person in your business doing everything. But as a business owner, we want to make sure that we know our financials, we know how money is being spent, we know the financial reports that are being submitted to get loans and things like that. So lesson overall is to know your financials. Another lesson you want to take away from this type of story, not just with the Uncle Nearest, but in general, when you hear companies in lawsuits for breach of loan terms or defaulting on loans, is to think about just because you can doesn't mean you should. As your business grows, as new opportunities come, Loans may come your way, loan offerings may come your way, investment opportunities may come your way. You may be presented with something that feels amazing at the time, but you really got to think about, is this something that I should do? Because just because I can doesn't mean I should do it. One of the things I think about or comes to mind is when you apply for, you apply for a loan to get like a mortgage, or you apply for a loan to get a car. And they always say like, oh, you've been approved for X amount, which is like 2 or 3 times probably the amount you thought, right? Like I don't need that much money to buy a car. I don't want to have a loan that big to buy a car. I don't want to have a loan that big to buy a house. Just because the bank said I could doesn't mean I need to put myself in a financial situation like that. Another lesson is that the spirits industry is hard to build a brand in. If you guys saw the episode I did with Charles from yourfriendcharles.com, he has a website for hundreds of Black-owned spirit brands. He talked about the amount of capital it takes to launch a business was crazy. Building a business in this industry is hard. And one of the things Fawn Weaver talked about in her book was some of the pushback and resistance they got being in Tennessee, being the new kid on the block. You know, you're entering a legacy business. You're entering a legacy industry. And so they don't take too kindly to newbies coming in Tennessee, you know, putting all the lights and getting a lot of the attention. Some of them don't like that too much. And so building a business in that industry is extremely hard. I'm praying that the Weavers can keep this business and it doesn't have to be sold. I don't know. I'm just really like, I want them to own this so bad because the story and the reason for its existence is so good, to honor a man's legacy who was essentially forgotten, right? And to build a business, to be a Black couple building a business like this from the ground up in an industry that is extremely hard to get into is something to be celebrated and recognized. So I'm praying and hoping that the Uncle News brand does not have to be sold and things can turn around and they can maintain ownership, because not only would it mean a lot to them, but I think it would definitely mean a lot to the culture. Now, our next story is one that had Nike and a little bit of hot water, but I didn't hear a lot of people talking about this. I actually came across the announcement of the Nike MLK sneaker from Here's the Thing podcast with That Chick Angel and Kev on Stage. And so Nike and LeBron James, they're releasing a new colorway of the LeBron 23s, and it's called Honor the King. It honors the night LeBron scored 51 points against the Memphis Grizzlies on MLK Day in 2028, and it also remembers Martin Luther King Jr. Now, the colorway, I think, the inspiration for the colorway has them in hot water, because the colorway, it's the aqua colorway, is a reference to the Lorraine Motel in Memphis where Dr. King was assassinated. And it's like, if they were going to pull inspiration from anywhere, did it have to be the motel? Now, I know the motel has been turned into a civil rights museum, and I think that may be where Nike was coming from, but still, they didn't need to pull reference from that situation. The sneaker is released to the public on February 24th via Nike and select retailers. Adult sizes will be priced at $210, and kid sizes are $165. Now, of course, Nike had a response. Y'all, and I'm going to read the response from their vice president for communications. Regarding the color and the decision to use that color and to honor Dr. King, Nike said this: design is so subjective, and some people the design will resonate with and others maybe less so. And obviously that becomes a little bit more charged when you have bigger principles at play. I think the intent, though, was really to pay homage to Dr. King, his life, and his legacy. But what the VP fails to realize is that they've now turned Dr. King's legacy and his life into commodity. And that's like so opposite of what Dr. King stood for. If they really loved that color and they wanted to honor LeBron, they could just say honor the king and say this is the honor the king sneaker for King James when he had that monumental game against the Memphis Grizzlies, and they could have kept Dr. King out of it. And so one of the things leaders need to understand, business owners, when you're in these rooms, you got to have people that are culturally competent to understand what is happening in culture and how it's going to resonate with a certain audience. Like, yeah, your intent may have been one thing, but what's the actual impact? Another thing is read the room. This was an opportunity. If you want to sell a shoe and you want to say we're honoring Dr. King, y'all could have tied those shoe sales to an organization. Donate to the King Center. Donate to an organization that is doing social justice work in Atlanta or anywhere around the country. Donate proceeds from the shoe sales to organizations in Minnesota or any other organization on the ground that is really doing what they can to show up and protect their neighbors. This was an opportunity, especially now, like we need to understand the dynamic and the landscape we're in now, to not just say, hey, we want to honor Dr. Martin Luther King with a sneaker, but we want to take that further, and this is how we're going to honor him. Otherwise, saying honor the king and putting LeBron James and it honors Dr. King and saying that's for the sneaker, it's just commercializing his legacy so y'all can make another dollar. And Nike don't need no more money, okay? This next story had me very curious. Netflix, it was announced, had entered the podcasting space at the end of 2025. So according to TechCrunch, they signed deals with iHeartMedia, Barstool Sports, and Spotify for exclusive video rights to select shows. One of the most popular shows that made headlines about this story was The Breakfast Club. And their goal is to compete with YouTube. According to YouTube, viewers watch over 700 million hours of podcasts each month on living room devices like their TVs in 2025, which was up from 400 million hours in 2024. Which I was surprised by this, but when I looked at my analytics on my video, a lot of my views come from people watching my YouTube videos on their television versus mobile phones. Now, this really had me thinking because I always am curious what happens to their audience. I watch the Breakfast Club clips on YouTube. So anytime they have interviews with guests, I would watch, like, they would post the full interviews on the YouTube channel. They have like the latest with Lauren, or they'd have other like headlines. They would do like the full story, which would be like 9 or 10 minutes. But since this change, they really cut back on those videos, y'all. If you go to the Breakfast Club YouTube channel, let's say they had a guest on there, someone's like promoting a movie or something, they will literally give you like 3 minutes and they're like, okay, watch the full video on Netflix. Like, they have cut all of that. Anything you were getting on YouTube before, they have caught. And so my question is, are they really going to convert people over to subscribe to Netflix for those who don't have a Netflix account? Because subscription fatigue is real. When I was looking at the comments on YouTube videos, people had a lot to say. And they were like, y'all built your audience on YouTube. And they just felt like it was unfair that they now are cut off from being able to get access to this content. On top of that, some of the comments also complained that Netflix wasn't even uploading the videos or the full episodes on time because, you know, people would listen and watch on their way to work, but they were uploading stuff late. And so I'm curious to know from you, if you currently watch podcast videos on YouTube, would you start watching them on Netflix? I have a Netflix account, but my first instinct isn't to go to Netflix to watch podcast videos. I like watching them on YouTube. So you guys let me know, if you have a Netflix account, would you start watching your favorite video podcast on Netflix? And if you don't have a Netflix account, would that be enough to get you to move over to start watching on Netflix? So one of the biggest lessons we can learn from the Netflix, iHeartMedia, the podcast deals is to really be strategic about how you pivot and grow your business. I know that's simple, sound advice, right? When I think about this, like the Breakfast Club, they're going to lose ad revenue from YouTube, but the assumption is that that money is being made up through the deal that they made with Netflix, that they're probably going to reach a larger audience on Netflix because Netflix is global. YouTube is too, but it may be a different level of global access that they get on Netflix. I don't know. We don't know because, of course, we don't know the deals. But you think about businesses when they get acquired by larger corporations all the time. Some of us are so unhappy, right? So we wanted them to stay smaller, stay Black owned. But they have to think about as business owners, well, I can scale. That gives me money to do and invest in other things. That gives my brand new opportunities. So you always have to weigh the pros and the cons of, if I'm pivoting and growing my business, how am I doing so that it can benefit my business in the long run? And be prepared too. Be prepared to upset some people along the way. So those are just 3 of the stories I wanted to cover today in the first Kickback Briefing. Let me know what you guys think about this format. I'm trying it out. It's new. It takes a lot of research. I'm working it out. Let me know what you think or comment on any of the stories that were shared. I appreciate you all tuning in, and I will catch you in another episode. If you enjoyed this episode, drop a comment below and don't forget to subscribe to the Kickback with Keri newsletter.